Welcome back to Azure MythBusters. I'm Mike James, and today we're looking at migrating .NET applications to the cloud. So the myth is that it's really difficult to migrate .NET framework workloads up to the cloud. But the reality is this is actually pretty simple, especially if we decide that we don't want to use containers. So I've got Visual Studio here open up on the PC. So I'm going to search for .NET Framework as a project option. We're going to see we have the .NET application with .NET Framework. So this isn't using .NET Core, which obviously with .NET Core is our cross-platform .NET environment or runtime that we can run on Linux or the Mac or naturally on the PC. .NET Framework can only run on the PC, so it does limit us in terms of the options running in the cloud, but it doesn't mean that we can't do that migration. So let's create a new project, and we'll call this running .NET in Azure. I'm going to select, I want to use 4.7.2, so the full .NET framework. We're going to hit create. We want MVC, but importantly, we want to select Docker support. So we can actually containerize this application and we can run it in a container orchestration service in Azure. And I'm going to show you two very simple ways that you can do that. So if we come back over to the portal, I can create some resources in order to run this workload in the cloud. So the easiest by far is something called a container instance. So if we search container instances, we can hit create. And this allows us to spin up a container without having to worry about the underlying infrastructure. So all we care about in this situation is just purely our container. So we'll create a resource group for this, and we'll call it myth busting, because we're going to bust that myth. We'll give the container a name, sample.net container. My spelling is awful here. And we're going to select a location. Now, image type, we can supply either a public image or a private image. Now, in this case, we're going to choose a public image. And I'm actually going to come over to our documentation, so devblogs.microsoft.com, and I'm going to grab the name here for one of the images that Microsoft releases. So this is a publicly available, built by Microsoft image that you can use to deploy your .NET Framework applications to the cloud. Now I'm going to pick Nano Server, which is an extremely small version of Windows Server designed for this kind of workload. So it's stripped away everything that we don't need from Windows, like the UI, for example, and it's leaving us just the pure essentials that we need to run our container workload. So I'm going to select Nano Server there, and lastly, I'm going to hit Windows. And now I'm ready to start creating a container instance in the cloud that can run a .NET Framework workload. So it's not just Linux, but this is a pretty expensive way to build and run containers. It's great for testing if you need to just spin up a new container and do a couple of tests and then tear it down, but you wouldn't want to be running production workloads with a container instance. Instead, if you want that kind of bare minimum work required on your part to get your .NET Framework workload running in a container in Azure, we can use web apps. So if we go to web apps, and we'll create this. And again, we'll create a new resource group. .NET sample app. We'll hit OK. And again, .NET sample app. Now we could deploy this, I call it natively. So this is just taking the results of the build folder, so that bin, and bringing it up to the cloud. And it's running in a similar way to how you would run your workloads on a virtual machine or even on your local machine testing. This is kind of how we've been doing this historically. But we can also select that we want to use a Docker image and that we're going to be supplying a .NET Framework, so we need to select Windows as the operating system. Then we can select our locations. Now we've got slightly limited options for locations at the moment, but that list is growing on a weekly basis. We'll select West Europe, that's the closest for me, being based in London. And then we're ready to go. So this can then go ahead and deploy that web app running that container. And I've actually already got some web apps deployed that are running in containers. So if I have a look for some resources. Here's my resource group, and I've already got a container registry, which is actually where, once I've built all my containers, be it on the local machine or maybe in the cloud, we can store those in the container registry, which is a private registry just for our containers. So all of those workloads that you're running on VMs right now, once you've containerized them and they're good to start running on different machines, you can put them in a central repository, and anyone in your team can then use that to create a version to maybe test with, or maybe you need to scale more instances of that workload out. So I'm going to come to repositories, and we'll see that I've got a couple of containers already deployed. So we have an Ignite service, we have a front end, and we have a product service. So front end, an inventory service, and a product service, because this is a microservice little back end. And if we can come in, we can see my tags, so we can see my latest version that I've deployed. And in fact, I can even start running this. And so if we have a look at our inventory service, for example, which is a .NET workload, running in an app service, we can come up and we can see straight away in the browser that we're going to inventory service.mig40myjam, which is just a URL, it's the name of this service, .azure websites. And this is a .NET application running in a container in the cloud. Just a couple of clicks to deploy this. It's not that much more work than deploying it natively. So if you want to find out more information around containerizing or migrating your .NET framework applications to Azure, then check out our docs at docs.microsoft.com.